Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Joe. Joe said we have the most time of any speaker of the day, so she said we had to be really good and fill it all up. So that's why I'm going to stand. I used to teach in junior high school, and I learned that it's very important to keep moving, make eye contact, make sure no one's beginning to throw something at you. Don't ever turn your back. Okay, so just a little bit of background about the National Fund. So we are an organization that was created by Philanthropy, and we are now in 32 communities around the country, including Dallas. And what we do is we raise money from national philanthropy, and we provide it to our local funder collaboratives. I'll explain that in a minute. And then they match our funding, and that they invest in developing what we call industry partnerships, so that they have a better understanding of what industry needs, and then they develop training programs based upon what they learn from industry. So why were we created? Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, a number of national philanthropies, Ford, Casey, Rockefeller, the Knight Foundation, a few others, they were not really very happy with the results that they were getting from investments in low-wage workers and in training. They said, what we're seeing is a lot of, really good efforts to bring people out of poverty, to bring people into develop skills, but we weren't seeing the placement and advancement. And we weren't seeing these folks getting into jobs that paid a family-sustaining wage. So they started looking around the country, and they began to look at a couple of other different models. And the models that they really found to be the most interesting were those models that had a very strong emphasis on organizing industry. Sector work, people call it. But in this particular cases, and they saw this in Boston, they saw it in Baltimore, San Francisco, and at the time I was working as a Deputy Secretary of Workforce Development in Pennsylvania, and we had about a $20 million annual program investing in organizing industry partnerships. Now the theory here is really quite straightforward. You won't find it surprising today, but at the time it was very different, and that was that as much as you want to help the folks who are looking for work and understand their barriers, you're not going to make smart investments in workforce development unless you understand the demand side. Unless you understand what industry wants, you can train and pray all you want, as Joe said, and you're not going to be successful. So the important thing is to not just do a survey, not just to have a focus group, but actually to have a partnership with industry, in which you are really a partner with them in addressing their particular needs in terms of whatever those needs might be in terms of workforce development. And if you're 3 steps removed, you're not going to be able to understand. So getting those folks together, industry by industry, healthcare, transportation, manufacturing, around a table and listening to them talk about their industry, talk about what's going on now, talk about what may be going on in the future. So when I think about the future of work, I think about being really, really close to industry. I'm just not smart enough to know about the future from reading, stories and surveys and books and stuff. I just don't. What I want to be is close to industry. Have them tell me what is going on right now. What's the future of their industry? The dynamic that we tried to create in those industry partnerships is where the employers are coming together and they're beginning to share things that they normally would not share in public. So we emphasize the importance of organizing employers with nobody else in the room. We start there. No educators, no consultants, no nonprofit organizations, training providers, but just the employers. But because initially what they want to do is feel safe that they're going to be able to be open to their peers. And it doesn't happen always right away. But eventually they begin to tell you about what their pain is, and they begin to say things like, we're just having a terrible time keeping people. We're getting good people, we're hiring, but they don't stay. We're having a very difficult time with supervision. We're having a really challenging time taking kids out of high school and moving them into our work. We don't understand about how to be more effective to our the organizations that are buying our products, because we just don't seem to be on top of the market. And so what we eventually are able to do is that when we get that information is, we like to say that we are moving from data, which is, of course, is necessary. You have to study industry, you have to understand it, you have to understand what's going on, and you have to analyze it, you have to turn it into information. But what we say is that last piece where the industry is partnering with you, that's intelligence. You can't Google it, right? It's not available. It's what's happening now around the table. These employers are telling you. And that's incredibly important to workforce development and to educators, right? Because educators want to have that information. But if everybody's trying to organize an industry partnership at the same time, then employers are like, woo, see, time out. I can't respond to 16 invitations. So, long story short, that's what we decided to do. That's what these foundations decided to do. That was their first innovation. The second innovation was they said, let's not provide so much funding that the organizations and communities that we're funding are dependent upon us for survival going forward. So we're going to pool our funds together. They pooled, was $5 million a year for 5 years, $25 million back in 2007, 2008. And the idea was that we would give out grants to all of our sites that applied, about $300,000 a year for 3 years. I'm sorry, $150,000 a year for 3 years. But they had to match it 4 to 1. They had to come up with a local match. What that did was create local funder collaboratives, just like the one we have here in Dallas today. And some of our funder collaboratives are in United Ways, some of them are in workforce investment boards, some of them are in community foundations, some of them are in economic development organizations. But they all have around, the basic theory was that they're going to bring local funders together, and the local funders are going to begin to collaborate. I met Joan, who's working with our Chicago collaborative, and she's saying, wow, it's really interesting what's going on. And was it Veronica from Canon? She said she's working with our North Carolina collaborative. And she said the same thing. It's really interesting. The foundations get together around the table, and they start comparing notes. And that collaboration changes the way they make investments locally. So that's the theory. Okay, it doesn't always work, obviously. Industry partnerships are not the answer to everything. But that's where it goes. And what this has done over 10 years, it has made sure that we have been on the ground in 30 communities. Actually, we've been in 40 communities around the country. Some of our sites didn't work out. And what it has told us is that we really need to recognize that there is a new way to do workforce development. What we would call next generation workforce development. And it's built upon the idea of industry intelligence, which is incredibly important. It's built upon the idea of making sure that you are a partner with industry. You'll hear later from Plinio Ayala. Plinio, where are you? They're right there. Plinio and Perscolis, they are intimately engaged. Well, maybe that's the wrong word. But they are really deeply informed about the partners in their work. And so they're partners. I was at Chicago a couple of weeks ago, Instituto de Progreso de Latino. And these folks are partnering directly with the employer to work out. Because why? Because, and Plinio is a perfect example of this, and many of our sites are doing this. We're true intermediaries. So in the beginning, the idea was an intermediary. Okay, an intermediary is somebody who knows about workers and knows about employers, and the intermediary makes things happen together. Again, that was the theory in the beginning. It's no longer acceptable. The intermediary has to be really deeply knowledgeable of the people they're trying to help, the barriers. But they have to be equally deeply knowledgeable about the employers to make that marriage happen. That's one of the things. The second thing is now is the importance of connecting workforce to economic development. So everybody's engaged in the Amazon fever, I call it, right? And all these proposals are put together. I'm from Philadelphia, and we have one. We're in the 20. I think Dallas is still one in the top 20. Mm-hmm. A bunch of other cities are still there. And, what's it all about? Right? It's about, business incentives, a lot of money on the table. Newark's put a lot of money, Chicago's put a lot of money, and all the communities have but what do you think Amazon is probably looking for the most? Talent, right? They're going to hire 50,000 people. Mm-hmm. That's going to be one of their crucial decision making. And so it's made everybody think about, wow, economic development is workforce development. So last night at the Cafe Momentum, right? So what do we see there tonight? He's changing the way that community is investing in people coming out of incarceration or juvenile facilities. He's saving money. If we think about workforce as being the way to put people to work, and we, just like you and Joe, just like Joe and you folks, the National Fund deeply believes in the importance of work and the dignity of work. That's the way that we're going to get to the next level. And then finally, I think what we want to talk about in terms of the new workforce development, the next generation, is the marketplace. Because the marketplace now, we have an incredibly tight labor market. In most of our communities, the unemployment rate is under 4%. In some communities, it's under 3%. It's really changing the way employers are thinking about their own business practices. Because turnover now could be the death of their company, right? If they can't find the folks, they not only can't do the work they have, they can't go after new work. And so many of them are really, really desperate for labor. And the unemployment rate is low. So who's not working, right? Mostly it's people with barriers, right? Some kind of barrier. The barrier could be that they can't find quality childcare. It could be that they can't get a car to get to the job. It could be that they don't have the skills. So addressing those kinds of things becomes really, really important. So today and throughout the day, we're going to hear about many of the aspects of those things. But I wanted to just sort of get us thinking that the old workforce development system is really dead. I mean, it might still be functioning in some ways, but it's really dead. We have to think about new ways of doing workforce development going forward. So let me now turn to the panel with that introduction. I did tell you I was going to say these things, right? Okay. So So I want to make sure that I give everybody's title right, so I don't depend upon my memory. So we have Wende Burton, Chief Relationship Officer.
No, that is not my title.
Okay.
That is a promotion, and I will take it.
All right.
Community Philanthropy Director over Economic Security.
Say that
thank
again?
you, Community Philanthropy Director over Economic Security, although I will take a Chief Relationship Officer role and the salary that comes with it. I'm going to go back and tell the foundation that you've given me a promotion. So thank you, Fred.
Okay, so in that spirit, Michelle Thomas, President of Global, Vice President of Global Philanthropy.
Ooh.
And Andrea Glispie, Director, Pathways to Work with the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. So let's start off the conversation with Wende. Wende issued a report recently on economic opportunity in Dallas. Economic Opportunity Assessment. I'm sure you could get it online.
Yes, it's on our website.
Okay. And this talked a lot about Dallas County. So we're here today talking about Dallas as a region as well as many other communities. But this had some incredible data. And the data, when we talk about workforce development, is always very important to help us figure out where we're going to organize partnerships and what we're going to do. What do you think, what were the things that were most important in the finding of this report?
So when we put this report out, it was first put out to help us kind of understand where are there opportunities for our philanthropy? Where are there places that we might be able to invest? And what we took in it is we took a different kind of, we decided to not just look at some of the regular stuff, but we look at geographical as well as looking at race and ethnicity and other factors. And what we found was that in Dallas County in particular, certainly people of all colors and ethnicities live all over the county, but we found was that people are really clustering in neighborhoods. So in Dallas County, it's a big square. And so in the top, if you drew an X across the square, the top triangle is mostly white. Hispanics tend to cluster east and west, and African Americans tend to cluster in the south. And what we found was that when we began to look at other data and other indicators of economic success, educational attainment, credit, income, unemployment, they also fell along those same geographic lines. And so what it said to us is that place matters. And that for us to really be able to understand and to do the kinds of investments that we think we need to do to really help move the needle, because all of the stats that are in the report are movable, we had to also understand the role that place was also having in addition to everything else.
That's great. That's great. So, Michelle, JP Morgan Chase has been very active in this place. So tell us a little bit about how you have thought about and what kind of investments you've made in the Dallas community.
Yeah, so thank you, Fred. So let me just kind of step back from that a little bit. And first of all, these colleagues I work with every day in this particular space, I will share with you that prior to our launch of our New Skills for Work initiative, which was a $250 million commitment targeting 9 major cities, we had nonprofit organizations that were investing in jobs, but not really focused in on middle skill occupations. And it wasn't until the Skills Gap report came about that really rallied the community to ignite around what are the fastest growing sectors. And in that report here in Dallas, it lifted up information technology and healthcare. And in the healthcare space, we know that there are 32,000 job openings and another 6,700 job openings. And so the data that Whitney just really talked about wasn't necessarily new. We knew that the pockets were in the southern sector, but there wasn't a targeted approach to address those communities. And so when you talk about some of the investments that JP Morgan Chase is really focused on in healthcare and IT, I guess I would lift up probably 3. One, we didn't really have a quarterback. We didn't have an intermediary partner. We didn't have anyone that was really focused in on bringing employers together and bringing funders together to address the critical needs that we were facing. And so hence, we invested in the Pathways to Work initiative led by United Way, and we've come a tremendously long way. Then, as a result of the Skills Gap report, it really propelled us to deepen the bench and to go further deeper. So as a result of that, the Dallas County Community College, we funded a report around the healthcare pipeline sector. And then we funded another report in Fort Worth around the aerospace and aviation sector, because we knew that we needed to go deeper in terms of where the jobs were. I will share with you that what we learned in terms of the report that was funded in the healthcare sector around nursing is that it's interesting that when you go out and talk about, particular JP Morgan Chase has, you know, a significant amount of money that we're able to deploy into the communities. I remember that one of my best grants, and I talk about it often, was to the Dallas County Community College. Because while we've given them over $500,000, when I went and asked, how can we be most helpful? Because we're all about serving issues in a community. What I learned from Dr. Mary Brownbach was that, Michelle, we're happy to take JP Morgan Chase $250,000 or $500,000, but we really need $50,000 to really figure out what this nursing pipeline looks like. Because while we can train people all day long to get an associate nursing degree, there's a serious choke point in the pipeline to the BSN. And what we need to do is to pull together a group of CEOs, come with a set of recommendations so that we can avoid this serious choke point. And maybe that comes with some sort of articulation agreement with 4-year institutions along with the community college so that the nurses that are in that rotation can go get their clinical slot rotation so that they can continue to graduate. Now, Dr. Joe May, I'm sure I didn't say that as eloquently as you would have said it, but I think I kind of got there. So then the other investment that we made, which I think is great, so we know that in Fort Worth, Lockheed Martin is a major employer, and they are focused in on training in advanced manufacturing and welding and so forth. But what they do really, really well, first of all, they have a training site, the Community Learning Center, which is right here. Lockheed Martin is right there. They have a loan executive that is full-time over there. They have about 6 or 7 people that are in head of talent that are working with them. And as a result of the new F-35 aircraft, they are projecting to hire 1,700 to 1,800 new employers. So for us, that was a really strong investment for us.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So Andrea, you're heading up Pathways to Work now here in Dallas, and this is an example of what I talked about before as a collaborative, a funder collaborative. And tell us about the kinds of investments and strategy that you're using here in Dallas.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. So Pathways to Work, as Fred said, we have about 6 to 7 local funders who contribute to a pot of what we call Pathways to Work pooled funding. And from there, we really fund 3 core strategies. One is convening thought leaders, and thought leaders, by that we mean funders, employers, training providers, and community-based organizations to really identify where the gaps are and how Pathways can invest to close those gaps. The second thing we do is we invest in innovative training practices. The types of things that we're looking for are investment and or training strategies that are just getting off the ground. They need a proof of concept. They need to develop a pilot. It's something new in the local workforce ecosystem that may not be attractive to a more of a bigger funder with a substantial portfolio, but could definitely use some startup resources to kind of get their idea off the ground. And so that is really where Pathways niche is as far as funding. Just to give you an example of that, you'll hear later this afternoon from Scott Hansen about his training partnership with Baylor Scott and White. Pathways was able to come early in and provide a planning grant to really help them develop the model so that they could move towards implementation. The third thing that we do is we build capacity. Capacity of funders. We try to provide them with resources, trends in workforce development so they can make their own informed investment decisions. We provide resources and trainings to training providers so they have the best resources to fine-tune, innovate, troubleshoot their programs to make them better. But more and more, kind of getting to the employer point that you raised earlier, Fred, is that we are investing in the capacity of our employers. And I would say that's really where our funding and investments have changed. You know, people tend to think that employers don't want to talk to each other because it's a competitive landscape. They don't want to share intelligence. But because of our tight labor market, because of the high churn in a lot of specific positions and industries that matter a lot to Dallas, employers more now than ever are willing to come to the table and share not only their challenges, but their successes, because they're tired of stealing from each other. They're tired of doing the same things and getting the same results. And they're hungry for new resources and new ideas that can strengthen their workforce. So right now we're really investing in capacity to bring employers together in healthcare and IT that meet 4 to 5 times a year and do just that. I can talk more about that as we go along, but out of those conversations have been some surprising insights. One of the big ones has been that both for healthcare and IT employers, when they're hiring for front-facing customer positions in their hospitals or at their help desk, they love to see retail on resumes. They love to see retail skills or retail experience because they know that person knows how to interface and deal with the customer. Particularly one IT employer that we work with says that he loves to hire bartenders because they're used to being with people at their worst or at their best. And they just have those interpersonal skills where if you're dealing with someone that is having a computer meltdown, is trying to finish a report and get it out the door, that person can really walk them through about how to fix their problem. So those insights are absolutely incredible. And we have really gotten a lot from making very small investments into the capacity of bringing those employers together.
It's great. There's in every one of the communities we're working in, we see employers stepping up. They want not only to be successful themselves, they want their community to be successful. They're willing to go the extra mile. So, Wende, we have this incredibly tight labor market here, and yet what we see from your report is that black workers, Hispanic workers only make less than like 60 cents on the average of a white worker. How, in the future of Dallas County, is it's going to be a majority, it's already a majority-minority community, and that's going to affect the general community of Dallas. How do we deal with that extraordinary racial disparity?
That is a great question. And I wish I had a nice glib answer for you. Because if I did, I could quit my job and not even have to be a chief leadership officer. I could be something even more important. I don't know. I think that the challenge is going to come for us as a community is how do we, I think some of it is the larger questions that we as Americans are all wrestling with right now. I think that we as a Dallas community are wrestling with. But I do think that it's, we know that education, as Joe said, is certainly going to be helpful. What we are seeing in our report is that education is not the equalizer that we thought it was going to be. And I think it broke down some of those myths. What we found in our report was that For a person of color to make equivalent to what a white person makes, they have to literally have 1 degree higher. With that comes additional burden of debt, and college tuition and all the things that come along with that. I am super excited. I want to give a plug to Joe May, who's going to talk a little bit later about what Dallas County Community College is doing with their Dallas Promise campaign, which is to provide to basically free tuition to students, low-income students in Dallas County who graduate from Dallas County schools to be able to get an associate's degree. I mean, things like that are going to set students up for great success because that is less money that they're going to have to get in terms of walking out of school with debt and student debt. So I think I think we're going to have conversation about what does living wage jobs look like, and what is a living wage, and how do we help people get tooled and skilled to be able to have those living wages and have those jobs that pay the benefits that provide people with the career growth that will eventually allow them to begin to close that income gap.
Thanks, Wendy. I guess Joe's going to have a big week next week. I understand that someone from J.P. Morgan Chase, a guy named Jamie Dimon, is coming to Dallas to make an investment.
He's coming to see me.
We knew he was coming to see you, Michelle, absolutely.
He's coming to check in with you.
But, Chase has just made a big announcement about an additional significant investment. And then as New Skills at Work ends, now they're making another big investment. And they're going to make investments in a number of new markets. They made a very strong commitment to Detroit. Now they're adding Chicago and I think Washington, D.C. So tell us a little bit about what this new investment might mean for Dallas and your portfolio going forward, Michelle.
Yeah, so we have a number of significant strategies that J.P. Morgan Chase has released. He mentioned Detroit, which we put an additional $50 million in, $150 million to address many of those challenges in the community. They were helping to come out of bankruptcy. And then we call them city strategies. And so there's Chicago, Detroit, and then for us here locally, but not just when we think about all of the initiatives, they are really kind of based on competition. So we have a pro-neighborhood application process that the deadline was a couple of weeks ago, and it was really around how we build out more equitable development plans for cities. And so we have had several applications come out of the Dallas market around primarily real estate development. And how we're working with the city and collaborating more broadly, and you could either get a planning grant for, I think it's $100,000, or you could get up to $5 million, but it has to be CDFIs, community development financial institutions, coming together to work on collaboratively how they're going to move the city forward and whatever the specific plans are. So I haven't seen all the plans, and they're going to announce them soon, but I'm hoping that Dallas will be one of those as a targeted market. In Houston, they also have a plan that they're submitting as it relates to post-Harvey and the buildup of communities, and so.
Great, that's great. We're anxiously awaiting that announcement. Yeah. Andrea, I mean, we talked about the challenge of the folks who are not working. We somehow have to get the folks who are not participating in the labor market into the labor market, because we have 6 million jobs available in this country, right? We've got a lot of people that still are not working. How is the industry partnership strategy in Dallas helping to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I would say that we are tackling both problems at the same time, and they require a different set of strategies. From a funding point of view, when we look at workers that are not in the labor market, that have barriers to employment, we are investing in nonprofits that have deep partnerships with other stakeholders like community colleges, local employers, the Public Workforce Board, so they can work to get those workers back into the labor market. But when it comes to workers, and when I talk about workers, I'm talking about entry-level or frontline workers that are making at or just above minimum wage. And because of our tight labor market, we have a lot of those types of workers in the labor market. And so really that's where our industry partners come most into play, is how do we help those workers persist and succeed in the labor market and hopefully advance. So from an investment point of view, the things that we're looking at supporting is job retention strategies. How do we help workers that get placed into entry-level jobs stay in those jobs? And then career advancement. How do we help those same workers access flexible education and training options that allow them to work, continue to get education, and hopefully move up in their employer, in their job. And then finally, what can we do to improve the quality of frontline work? I say this a lot, but I feel that all of us really do have to start to walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning that it takes a long time for someone who has a lot of barriers to employment, get into the labor market, and then move up in the labor market. And while they're doing that, the reality is, as Fred said, is that, you know, they need to have an income coming in order to then be able to pursue education opportunities and also take care of their families. And so what we see from the Pathways to Work point of view is that improving the quality of frontline work ultimately drives higher career advancement rates and higher retention. That if someone feels valued and supported in their role, they are going to take advantage of the opportunities to get ahead. And that's really where our industry partnerships come in, particularly in healthcare. We've been working in collaboration with a local healthcare industry association called the DFW Hospital Council Foundation, and together we've pulled about 6 major healthcare systems in Dallas and 1 in Fort Worth that meet, again, about 5 times a year. Early on, they identified a shared challenge of retaining patient care technicians. Now, this is kind of in years past, you may have known this as kind of like an orderly position. They serve food, they help patients get in and out of beds, they transport patients to different areas of the hospital for testing, they may do vital signs. It's a hard job. They spend probably double the amount of time with a patient than a doctor or a nurse would during a patient's stay. And normally times they're interfacing with people at their very worst. They're sick, they're out of surgery, it takes an emotional toll. Those positions, for all of the reasons I just mentioned, have a very high churn or turnover rate, and yet they're so critical to patient care and satisfaction, which drive a whole host of other business metrics for hospitals. And so these hospitals came together in our meetings and said, we all have the same problem with keeping good patient care technicians. We want to start working on, sharing intelligence, sharing best practices, figuring out what we can all do together. And so we helped lead them down that road. And it was really, when I say we helped them lead, it was me really just giving them the space and the coffee and the cookies so they could talk and share intelligence. And ultimately, that work led to an investment from the National Fund for Workforce Solutions to provide small grant funding to 3 of our hospitals that they could use to test and pilot career advancement and retention strategies to help the patient care technicians. And already, it's just accelerated the hospital's efforts to really support their patient care technicians, in ways that, we did not see before we were able to leverage that investment from the fund. So we're really excited about that work and excited to see where that goes.
Thanks, Andrea. We are, fortunately, because of some investments from Prudential and Hitachi foundations, we've been able to fund 10 of our collaboratives to work on what we call job design, job redesign, so that employers can come together and redesign their jobs so that they actually become better jobs for frontline workers and actually better jobs for the organization with better outcomes. I have this incredibly beautiful clock looking right at me here, and it's telling me it's time for questions. So, yes, we have a question right in the back.
Wende, you touched, I'm Deborah Good, I'm with the Rogers Foundation.
I can't hear.
Okay, is that better? Okay. Wende, you touched on this ever so slightly, and I was wondering, especially in Dallas, it's a growing city, and real estate development, it feels like we're pushing people further out.
Yes.
So how much is transportation a barrier to, you said in what you're talking about, place matters. So what do you do and how do you solve that problem with transportation, not just specifically Dallas, but other places?
That is a great question. And transportation, I can tell you, is a huge barrier. We know when we looked at our data, and the city of Dallas had also invested in some work with University of Texas in Arlington, looking at our DART system, which is our local public transportation system. It's a huge barrier. Transportation, public transportation at least, is still handled at a city level here in North Texas, which means that cities have to opt in and pay in, and some cities have more representation on the board than the others do. There are a lot of cities who have opted out. So if you're in Grand Prairie or Arlington, which is in between Dallas and Fort Worth, there is no public transportation system, none. Which means if you don't have a car or a way to get to a job, that you are basically trapped in the situation that you're in. Transportation is a ginormous barrier. I think it's, I think as funders, the question comes to us is, are there things that we can fund? One of the things that we have funded in the southern sector is an organization that was a tiny, literally grassroots nonprofit. They had started with 2 guys with a minivan. And they were picking up people at the Ledbetter station, which is the farthest DART station, and driving them to warehouses, to either the Inland Port or to Ennis and McKinney. And a lot of these are folks who are either single moms or people who are reentry because warehouses will hire them. Their business model was that they had a relationship with a temp agency that was screening, that would hire folks, would take $10 out per trip out of their check from the temp agency, and was paying their way. What we found was that their job retention rate was 60% and climbing of folks who were getting converted after 90 days from being a temp to a permanent employee. And they were going from about $12 an hour to $15 to $16 an hour. And what we even found was that after they were no longer employed by the temp agency, they were still paying $10 a trip because they liked the camaraderie of being in the minivan with everybody, and it saved the wear and tear in their cars. And what they were doing was connecting people to work. So we made it a pretty sizable investment to them. Even before they'd had their 501c3, they had a fiscal agent, another nonprofit that they were running through, to fund a strategic plan for them to help them begin to figure out how to grow themselves and scale their work up. So I think it's looking at, I think for us as foundations, the challenge is if we know that transportation is a barrier, are there things that we can do with our money and with our philanthropy, like Andrea said, that is some creative ways? How can we, kind of think outside the box with our money and our investments to support the efforts within local communities? Can we fund pilots? So funding a nonprofit that's really not a nonprofit, who is basically 2 guys with a minivan, is pretty risky funding. But I think it's sometimes you got to take that risk. And I think as philanthropists, we can sometimes do more risky entrepreneurial funding where the private sector, corporations can't. So we can fund pilots, we can fund proof of concepts, we can fund startups, we can fund capacity building, we can fund operating costs and capital, and all those things that really help build up the capacity of the communities themselves to help address the needs and the issues that they have. So maybe transportation is an issue, but can we also support microenterprise and entrepreneurship that help some communities that maybe don't have access to transportation grow businesses so that people can live, work, and play all in their own community?
Great. One of the sites, yes, one of our sites was able to help a manufacturer understand the cost of turnover to the point where they decided to actually provide $1,000 down payments to about 50% of their staff so that they could buy cars, and it cut their turnover by $100,000. So in effect, their investment doubled, and they were able to be successful. So the transportation issue is a big one, and it's solvable. One of our sites in Atlanta is looking at using Uber to get workers to the Hartsfield Airport because the transportation system there is not able to be a 24/7 situation. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Michael D. I'm interested in the intersection between job opportunities and the delivery of social services. So at what point do people start to lose social services that they get, income that they get, other opportunities, when they get a job, and do those social services serve to disincentivize people from going out and getting a job? So, people go and get a job and lose certain services. Are they better off? Aren't they better off? A job is uncertain. A social service will often be treated as something that is more certain. So I'm interested in that intersection and how does that work, and how do you have to put job opportunities together with the delivery of social services so that it's a net gain for people and pulls people into the workforce?
Yeah, we call this the benefits cliff, and it's a real issue, definite issue. If you're a single mom with childcare and you got 2 kids, 1 in school, 1 at home, you go to work, and I just got my son. If you go to work, you actually lose money. You actually make less money going to work, or you make so little money that working that much is so yes, it's a big issue. And we really need to address it. And I think you're getting at what we need to do, and that is to change the incentives to go to work and lift them up so that they can keep some of those benefits in the short term, eventually to come off of those benefits in the long term. Because you're right, I mean, the financial incentives are, and it's mostly focused on single moms with kids. Those are the ones who really have the benefit. Anyone else want to jump in on this one?
No, I mean, I think we've talked about the transportation barriers, and I think about the cliff. I would say that the other challenge, when we're talking about better skills, better jobs, the other challenge is that while you may train individuals, low-skilled workers, for a certification, we need to reduce the discrimination that we're seeing primarily with employers, because they're still focused in on a 4-year degree. Yeah. And so you're training them here, yet we can do so much better if we build those partnerships around, I think, what did you call it, degree inflation? What term did you tell me? Inflation. Degree inflation. So.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that around the country, and a lot of good organizations are working on trying to change employers' perceptions from competencies rather than just credentials. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, really appreciate that. We're getting the hook.